Welcome to the Sporting News. I'm Kieran Francis, and joining me is Aidan Cellini to talk about AFL Trade Period. Well, it's just shut, and everything's happening at the moment. It's actually quite overwhelming. Where do we start, Aidan? Let's get stuck straight into it.
It's been a hectic, obviously, last day. The trade time is kind of ticked away there. Deadline did end at 7:30 today after starting last Monday. So it's been a very, very busy trade period. I mean, we've just seen Josh Dunkley recently traded to the Brisbane Lions. We've seen Josh Shackey as well, Lachlan Hunter move, both of them to Melbourne. I mean, there's just so many names. I wouldn't even know where to begin. But let's start with Josh Dunkley. He was obviously quite a big name thrown around. The draft, obviously, winning Western Bulldogs 2022 Best and Fairest. He had a great season, but he seems like he's going to be a pretty handy addition for the Lions. How does he fit in at the Brisbane Lions?
Yeah, well, I mean, we'll just mention what he went for. I've just bear with me on the screen over here. Brisbane are parted with pick 21 and their future first and second round picks. And there was a flurry of other late picks going the other way. So but they ended up paying a fair price for Dunkley. There was obviously the threats with the preseason draft as well, but got the job done. We saw Brisbane's midfield during the final series being quite thin on. We saw sort of Jared Lyons was unfit, and it was kind of left up to Lachie Neale a fair bit, and was probably a contributing factor to as why they probably struggled in the final series. So, I mean, adding in Dunkley, and we'll talk about Gunston later. Dunkley can go forward, can play forward as well. Adding to the forward mix alongside Charlie Cameron and McCarthy, those smaller forwards, it's pretty tantalising.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a scary prospect, a team that lost the preliminary final to add those two players of that caliber, let alone two father-son draft picks that they're both nominated in Will Ashcroft and Jasper Fletcher, both probably going in the first round, which is why Brisbane are, I guess, reluctant to trade out a lot of their picks because they have to make sure they have to retain some of their draft points to allow those players to come in without the club going into a deficit. It's a scary prospect, and honestly, I can't wait for Josh Dunkley to join the Lions and see what he can do up there.
Well, it's all happening. So it looks like Rory Lobb has joined the Bulldogs, and Jaeger O'Meara has actually joined Fremantle, and that's in addition to Ollie Henry going to Geelong, Tom Mitchell to Collingwood, Cooper Stevens to Hawthorn, Lachie Hunter joined the Bulldogs. We'll talk about all of these, and we'll also start to mention as it comes through what's actually being traded for the players. Let's talk about the Ollie Henry deal. So it looks as if Collingwood have actually managed to get they've traded obviously Henry to the Cats, and they've got pick 25 and Tom Mitchell back. That on the scheme of things, that looks pretty decent.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, Ollie Henry was quite, I guess, vocal, so to speak, in his desire to head down the highway to Geelong and join his older brother Jack. That is after Geelong won the 2022 premiership. So I guess in some sense it's quite romantic that the Henry brothers will unite. But obviously Collingwood were quite stern in their desires to see what they could get in return for Henry. They were always kind of steadfast on getting that first round selection. I mean, Henry came, I think, as well. I think it's pick 17 in the 2020 draft. Obviously a highly talented player, showed many a times throughout 2022 that he could perform at the level. Obviously there's a few minor tweaks that he would have to add to his game to get that level of consistency. But I mean, obviously his ability to find himself in the right time. I mean, we can just recall that game in Fremantle, I think it was round 10, where it was actually the sub and came on, kicked 4 goals and won them the game, as well as the wet and dreary day at the MCG against Hawthorn in the weeks following. So I think the three-way deal that sees Tom Mitchell, obviously, as you said, join Collingwood. It seems almost like a win-win. Obviously, Collingwood didn't get that first-round selection, but pick 25 isn't actually too bad. But obviously, they've secured the 2018 Brownlow medalist. So I think it's a win-win. And Cooper Stevens, we haven't seen too much of him yet, but maybe a fresh start at the Hawks is definitely what his career might need.
Should we just go back to Henry for 1 second? Why do you think he, struggled to sort of establish himself at Collingwood this year? Because Collingwood had a great season, and the forward line was working quite well. There seemed like there'd be a role there for that type of player. He's a bit different to the rest of the players there. Like, why do you think that he kind of didn't why didn't it work for him?
Well, in my opinion, it was the emergence of Ash Johnson, the mid-season recruit from the 2021 season, kind of came out of the blue. I think Craig McRae said when he first got to the club at the start of the 2022 season that Ash Johnson was just flying at pre-season, and unfortunately, I think he tweaked his hamstring on the eve of round one, which obviously delayed his debut game and his selection in the senior side, and had I think a few minor setbacks in maybe the first half of the season. But I mean, he obviously had a great second half of the year. Definitely, it was a sharpshooter, rarely missed. I think everyone can remember the two goals from the boundary line when he was check siding it from 35, 40 metres out. He was a very special player. I'm pretty sure he kicked 4 goals in, I think, the round 21 clash against Melbourne on that Friday night, that absolute belter of a game. So, I mean, it was hard for Ollie Henry to, I guess, fit in a lineup that was firing on all cylinders. I mean, they won 12 out of 13 games leading into the finals. And you can't really break up a winning combination. And unfortunately for Henry, he probably didn't see a spot in the senior side in 2022, but the acquisition of Daniel McStay and even Bobby Hill as a smaller forward probably means he might be on the outer, which, for his sake, isn't that great. And obviously the move to Geelong probably might be better for his career in the long run.
Yeah, well, I guess now he goes to Geelong. Geelong have Hawkins and Cameron. That will mean that Henry will obviously be able to line up as a mid-sized forward in that forward line, I guess, alongside possibly Gary Rowan, similar type of players, I guess, similar size and everything. I mean, maybe they play a team into a defender because he would be able to play as a defender as well. So interesting moves there. Tom Mitchell to Collingwood. Kind of didn't think it was going to happen, and kind of has on the deadline. Huge bolsters the midfield massively. He's a different type of player to what they've got. How do you see Tom Mitchell fitting in at Collingwood?
I personally think it's a great acquisition by the Pies. I mean, we were seeing Hawthorn, they're trying to kind of rejuvenate their list, really add some youngsters kind of into their mix. They've obviously got a large list of young players coming through the ranks, like Josh Ward and Connor McDonald, and even James Sicily, obviously still leading from the front. He was a Hawthorn best and fairest in 2022. You got Mitchell Lewis. So I guess Mitchell probably saw an opportunity to leave the club and potentially play in finals. Obviously, the Pies lost by 1 point in the preliminary final against the Swans, so they obviously think they're right around the mark. Obviously, Graham Wright and Craig McRae and the coaching staff really think that the Pies can really push for a premiership potentially in 2023 and maybe even 2024. Whilst they've got the breadth of experience like a Scott Pendlebury, still Sidebottom, who are nearing toward the end of their careers. Darcy Moore's probably right in that sweet spot of 26, 27, 28. Same as Jordan De Goey. So they must think that they're really a chance to kind of push for a flag in the next couple of seasons. And I think also they lacked a bit of midfield depth, as we saw. Taylor Adams went down in the qualifying final against Geelong, which we know he's not necessarily the most prolific ball winner or the most effective, but what he does bring to the side, he brings heart and he brings that hardness that a lot of the Collingwood midfielders don't necessarily have. If you do watch Taylor Adams closely, he's always the one on the bottom of the packs, feeding the ball out, which is essentially Tom Mitchell's game. Tom Mitchell won a Brownlow in 2018 based off that. Obviously, you have to be some type of player to extract the ball from those tight stoppages and those contested areas and feed it out to the outside players, which is where players like a Jordan De Goey, who can be that 60, 70, 80 metre player, burst from the stoppage, 10, 15 metres and deliver it inside 50. Nick Dacos will probably go through the centre there. Josh Dacos as well. He's pretty silky, I guess, on both sides of the body. So I think it's a very good move from Collingwood to bring in Tom Mitchell. Obviously adds a little bit more depth and more experience. I mean, Tom Mitchell's, I think, now 29. I believe, he was at Sydney before he went to Hawthorn, so he's been around for quite a bit. He's been at good sides as well. Sydney through, I think he played in that 2016 grand final loss. 2018 the Hawks, they made top 4. So he knows exactly what it takes to be a good side in the AFL, although it is hard for obviously majority of the teams and only one can be the winner. But I think Tom Mitchell is definitely a good acquisition for the Magpies.
Well said, Aidan. Cooper Stevens goes to Hawthorn. What's going on at Hawthorn? So now from Hawthorn, Gunston's gone, Mitchell's gone, Diego O'Meara's gone, which we'll talk about for in a sec. They've brought in Cooper Stevens. He's a good young player, but that is a lot of experience to take out of a team. They did bring in Lloyd Meek as a ruckman, which is part of the Jaeger O'Meara deal. We'll speak about that in a sec. But that means that they've got Ned Reeves as a ruckman. It's going to be a tough year for them next year. Who's going to play midfield for them?
Sorry, Kim. Yeah, as you said, they're bringing in this breadth of youth Obviously, Cooper Season, quite a young player. Lloyd Mead probably didn't get a fair crack at the Dockers, so looking for some new opportunity. Ned Reeves as well. I think he's only 24, maybe 25 in the eve of the season, so of 2023, that is. So they're quite young. And you can see it's a very bold move, releasing a lot of their experienced players. They even chucked up Luke Bruce and Chad Wingard in previous years as well to kind of bring in, I guess, some young either draft picks or players from rival clubs who just weren't getting a go. So my opinion is that they're really trying to, I guess, gather maybe the core 10 to 16 players that will play week in, week out. And they may experience some teething problems, They might cause a few blowouts in 2023 because they've got so much youth, because they're just not experienced yet. But the fact that they might be all kind of improving together from the ages of, 20, 22, 23. And once they hit that, again, that sweet spot between 26, 27, 28, when these players enter their prime, they're kind of planning for that, maybe, that 3, 4, 5-year period where they're toward the top, as opposed to trying to just regenerate and bring in some experience now, then they retire. And, kind of, it wouldn't really work, I think, in what they've got at the moment. They've got a lot of young talent, but they just need to get games into them. They need to get experience into them. Josh Ward, I think, will be a massive star. I've got big raps for him, but just needs time to adjust to the AFL game, the speed of it, the contest, the physicality, even in the mental capacity in which these players have to adjust from junior football, under 18 football, and even VFL to AFL football is a big jump. So I think I do like what they're doing. It is bold, but I think Sam Mitchell and the Hawthorn coaching panel do have them on the right way.
I tell you what, they've ripped the guts out of the team, though. It's gonna be a tough season. I personally think it can be a bit of a balancing act sometimes. You don't want to lose nearly every game, because it kind of breeds a bit of a losing culture. We saw, Melbourne for a long time kind of ban that cycle. And I mean, Hawthorn didn't have a good year last year. It's bold, you're right. And, players like Ward, Connor McDonald are going to get more midfield time. But, I mean, like those three players, O'Meara, Mitchell, Gunston, at their best, are they Hawthorn's best three players? Pretty close to it. It's an interesting time. So apparently, Jaeger O'Meara was traded to Fremantle for Lloyd Meek and a future second. So that's not quite a straight trade, but it's pretty close. Lloyd Meek obviously service the requirements with Luke Jackson joining Fremantle, which we'll talk about later. Jeremy Starp is staying at the Suns, which he was linked with Freo too. So I guess they were Fremantle obviously keen to bolster midfield. They've got O'Meara and not get Jeremy Sharp. Rory Lobb has got to the Bulldogs for pick 30 and a future second. So after all that haggling, it doesn't seem to be any traded for that much, hey?
Yeah, well, I mean, there was obviously a lot of to and froing. I think everyone did, especially as the deadline loomed, that it had to be a trade before that. I think the Dunkley trade had to go through before the Bulldogs could attack Lobb, and then Fremantle wanted to make sure they did get Jackson, which happened, I believe it was yesterday, before they allowed Lobb to go. And obviously they said they wanted to keep Meek, but obviously he would like to go. So it was kind of a trade merry-go-round, more of a domino effect where if one goes, the rest of them generally will fall. I do like it from the Bulldogs. They have recently lost, Josh Shackey went to Melbourne as of earlier today, and Zane Cordy went to St Kilda as a free agent sometime last week. So bringing in another tall as well as Liam Jones, I think it really, although they did lose two talls, the talls they're bringing in, as in Jones and Lobb, really add a bit more experience and probably a higher level of performance that maybe Cordy and Shackey did. Shackey, unfortunately, just couldn't crack into the senior side as consistently. Only played 18 games in the last 3 seasons. And Cordy was to and fro between Ryan Gardner and Alex Keefe in that back line. So obviously you bring in Liam Jones, then their forward line looks as dangerous as ever. You've got Aaron Norton, who is soon to be an All-Australian. Sam Darcy can play at both ends, and there's talks he'll probably go down back. Jamara Ugle-Hagan as well. He had a few moments this year where, he kind of took games by storm, inclusive of that 5-goal performance against Melbourne under the at Etihad as well. So, I think Rory Lobb does add another dynamic. Obviously, he can go into the ruck, which kind of, prevents even the thought of potentially Norton or Josh Bruce going in there. So they've got some strength as well in Lobb in that second ruck role, to assist Tim English as well. I think it was a great trade period for the Bulldogs.
How are they going to fill their tools in the team? You didn't actually mention Josh Bruce as well. I think Josh Bruce, mate, you may actually see him go down back. He started his career down back, and he obviously struggled to come back from his knee injury, and was actually dropped for the final series. But how do you fit them all in? Lob can't play back, but you've got Norton has to play forward, Ugo Hagen has to play forward, Lob has to play ruck forward. I don't think that Lob's the number one ruckman, so I think that you play either him in English 50-50 or pretty close to that, or English, 75-25 or whatever. So an intriguing mix down there. There's plenty of moving and shaking down at the Bulldogs. Just looking through, we also have had Hunter Clark got very close to getting to North Melbourne, but North Melbourne, St Kilda wanted to get pick 2 or 3 whilst giving the Kangaroos pick 9 back. So it was like downgrading it. And then I think the Saints were going to send a pick to North Melbourne. North only wanted to give up picks in the second and third round. So that didn't get through. And so it's all happening at the end here. We'll move on to some earlier trades in the day. There was 3 talls that joined other clubs quickly. Horne-Francis joined Sydney. Sam Wiedemann joined Essendon. And as you mentioned, Josh Shackey joined Melbourne. Pretty much all same players moving on to get more opportunity. Do you see anything in those moves at all?
Personally, I think for Sam Wiedemann, it's probably one of the best. Well, is the best move for his career. Obviously, he struggled to kind of cement his spot in that Melbourne side. Really, just couldn't take the opportunities as they could. Even when Tom McDonald went down, and throughout the majority of the 2022 season, he just kept finding himself in and out of the side. So, and ended up playing in the 2022 VFL Premiership with Casey Demons. So I think the move for him, it will be good. I think Essendon do lack a little bit of height up there, just for an assistance with Peter Wright. Obviously, Peter Wright, 2022 Crichton medalist. Probably a bit stiff to not be included in the All-Australian squad. 53 goals for the year. So he's doing his part, but he needs, kind of a Robin to his Batman. He kind of needs someone else to help him out a little bit. Wiedemann can do that. He's shown glimpses where he can chip in 2-3 goals a game, take 6-7 marks and kind of hit the scoreboard or be involved. He has, I believe he's got a great aerobic capacity. He can really get up the ground. He's kind of very versatile for a tall man. You see a lot of taller players, not being able to kind of run and be athletic like a Wiedemann can be. So I think it's a good move for him. And Francis kind of just adds another bit of depth to the Sydney Swans. Obviously, their back six is arguably one of the best in the business, excusing the grand final, which unfortunately they just couldn't perform on the day. But, he obviously wanted a fresh start. He looked at going to his home state, South Australia, and potentially going to Port Adelaide or Adelaide. That couldn't come through. Sydney obviously picked him up. I think it was for a future 4th round and maybe a pick 37. I think there was a pick swap in the midst there. So I think for him, sometimes a fresh start is exactly what a player needs. You might get bogged down in a club for so long, 5-6 years. I think he might have been there with Essendon 4. So maybe a new city, a new club, fresh faces might do the trick for him.
Get your questions and comments in. We'll do our best to answer them. We just got a comment from Dylan, where he says Port Adelaide will have a better year next year. They've done well this trade period. I guess this leads us into the Jason Horne-Francis trade and who won it. So that's probably the biggest trade of the trade period. Very quick summary. North Melbourne gave up Horne-Francis in pick 1 to essentially get picks 2, 3 and a future first. So I guess they kind of got a future first on top of, out of the whole deal, I guess. GWS got pick 1, but gave up 12 and 3 to get it. So it was almost like a bit of an upgrade. West Coast is interesting. They obviously gave up pick 2 and Willie Rioli to get 2 first-round picks, 8 and 12, and a bunch of other futures. And then Port Adelaide picked up the 2 players, Horne-Francis and Rioli, didn't give up a player in return, which is important. And they ended up giving up pick 8, a future first, and a bunch of other future picks. How do you see that deal?
I think in my eyes anyway, Port Adelaide definitely winners in that. They were adamant to not lose any of their stars. Dan Houston was named as a potential trade target, Riley Bonner, and I think there was a few other players as well that might have been thrown into the mix. But they were held steadfast on not releasing any of their players, and they didn't. So Port fans should be excited about the prospects that they have brought in. Jason Horne-Francis, obviously the 2021 number 1 pick, a South Australian boy, so hopefully he won't have homesickness or any ill feeling at his home state, so hopefully he'll be there for 10, 12 years. Junior Rioli as well, I think, can really break open games. He kind of has this ability to have 10, 12 touches, kick 3 goals, or might, set up 4, 5, 6 scores himself. So he doesn't need much to impact games in a big way to actually have an impact. So I think, Port Adelaide definitely won the trade in that instance. Kieran, do you think anyone else kind of did okay? So obviously the Roos did trade out pick 1, but they did receive pick 2 and 3. What are your thoughts on that?
My personal opinion is I think it's a bit too hard to. I threw another bus there. I think it's a bit too hard to pick a winner. There's so many moving parts to this trade. I think Port did well not to give up any players in return. And as you said, like you add Horne-Francis and Junior Rioli into the mix of players that can play. Willie Rioli's mainly a forward. Junior Rioli's mainly a forward, and he kind of push up the ground. But Horne-Francis can kind of play forward, play midfield, into the rotation with Connor Rozee and Zach Butters. Junior Ollie probably fits a good place where Robbie Gray was there last season as like a small lead up forward, and it just kind of creates more options, I guess. Port didn't end up getting Ranagalea, but if they got him, they'd have a tantalising tour mix as well, because obviously they've got Dixon, they've got Finlayson, they've got Marshall, and they've got Georgiades. So I think Port did pretty well. As for West Coast, I think it's risky for them trading pick 2. Pick 2, I know pick 1 and pick 2 aren't always guaranteed players, but they really are lacking in, top-end talent, as we've talked about before in previous videos. And I guess now they have 2 picks in the top 12 in 8 and 12. But, they're going to really want to get this right because, I think they think they can get some local players that they were keen on later on. So that's why they were happy to slide down a little bit, get an extra pick. I don't think really Rioli is a massive loss to them. They're rebuilding and everything. And they've got Liam Ryan, who's a very similar type of player as well. So, and North Melbourne, they've almost come out even, haven't they? Really, it's hard to say. I guess, they've got 2 picks in a row. So whoever goes first, they're going to take the next 2. They get the first. And GWS, again, I guess they end up getting a first round pick out of losing Hopper and Toronto. Probably sets them back quite a few years, but getting the first round pick is kind of a bit of conversation, you could call it. Where do you think that Horne-Francis will fit into Port Adelaide?
Yeah, I think so. He was drafted obviously as a midfielder. I think it will take a little bit of time for him to develop into, hopefully for Port Adelaide fans, one of the elite midfielders of the competition. He said in an interview shortly after being traded to Port Adelaide that he wants to be the best player in the competition, which I think he has the assets of being one. He has kind of a young Patrick Dangerfield kind of esque ability and game style. He's very hard at the ball. He's quick off the mark. He bursts through packs. He's a ferocious tackler. He's a contested ball, but he has this innate ability to take the ball from the inside to the outside very, very quickly, and that's obviously quite a unique skill to possess. I think initially he'll probably start, across the half forward, as probably young midfielders do. They've still got Ollie Wines, Travis Boak, even Willem Drew, Dan Houston started going through the midfield as well throughout 2022. So there's definitely potential for him to kind of just chop out those players. But sometimes maybe Ken Hinkley, which he has done in the past, you kind of just throw the caution to the wind. He chucked in Connor Rozee and Zach Butters in the midfield when they were 0-5 earlier this year and really couldn't generate anything from their midfield, and really obviously started the season quite badly. So a Connor Rozee, Jason Horne-Francis, and a Zach Butters starting lineup in the midfield does get me excited. I'm sure it would get Power fans excited as well. That's a pretty dangerous prospect. I know they're all quite young. I think the oldest one, Rozee might be only 23 or 22 as well, same as Butters, and obviously Horne-Francis is turning 20 next year. So, in a few years' time, those 3 will be, just a scary thought, and I think opposition fans probably wouldn't want to think of that too just yet. But I think he slots into their 22 straight away. He showed plenty of glimpses in 2022, at North Melbourne, and I think Port are quite lucky to have got him.
Exciting times for Port Adelaide. We'll move on to Brodie Grundy. So Grundy's obviously joined Melbourne and now will be with Max Gawn as a partnership. So the two probably best rucks over the last, cumulatively over the last 5 years. They've both been All-Australian together and at separate times and whatnot. Pick 27 was given up by Melbourne to Collingwood for Grundy. Obviously, it's a salary dump. We'll speak about that a bit later. Because Melbourne taking quite a bit of the salary. How do you see Grundy's 29 when the season starts? Max Gawn will be 31. How do you see how Grundy will fit in at Melbourne?
I think people have quickly forgotten how good Brodie Grundy can be and is. I mean, obviously, since he ironically signed that lucrative 7-year deal at Collingwood at the end of 2019 off the back of, I think it was back-to-back Copeland trophies and back-to-back All-Australian selections, his form's kind of tapered a little bit. Obviously, hasn't hit the marks in which we're probably used to and expect of him. But I mean, if you actually look at the stats, he's still one of the dominant ruckmans in the competition. I think when in the first 6 rounds before he got injured and hurt his knee at Collingwood, they were top 8 in clearances as a football club, but then they ended up 14th at the end of the season, which doesn't cover, especially in finals and in crunch time. So I think if you're Melbourne, you obviously lose Luke Jackson to Fremantle. He wanted to go home. Obviously, we'll touch on that a little bit later. But bringing in Grundy for Jackson, I think it's just a smart move. They're right in this premiership window. Obviously, falling short in 2022, in straight sets. Obviously, probably a disappointing year after obviously winning last year in 2021. But that expected bounce right back into premiership contention. Top 4, they'd be thereabouts. They still finished second this year, despite people thinking they were, had a premiership hangover and the like. So they were still right up there with Geelong, although John probably had them as the best team in the competition this season. But I mean, Grundy does add another dynamic. It allows Simon Goodwin a whole preseason to work on Gawn potentially being a 70% forward player and then maybe 30% in the ruck. Obviously, we know he's still the premier ruckman in the competition with his 6th All-Australian this year. I think it's 5 in a row now for Max Gawn. So he's a super player, and obviously he's nearing the end of his career, but his form's still not tapering off. He's still performing at a level that we've expected for so long, and he continues to reach that level. And obviously, there might be a mini, succession plan, so to speak, where Gawn obviously retires, but Grundy might still be there for a year, 2-3 years after he does. But I think, it's going to be quite scary. I think if Brodie Grundy gets a really, really good preseason into him, I mean, he kind of revolutionised the ruck role. He kind of turned into this 4th midfielder in that centre bounce. Not only was he winning the taps to his teammates, if they didn't actually receive the ball and get that clean clearance, his follow-up work was second to none. He was the next player at the forefront of the ball. Obviously he provides an excellent run around the ground, one of the best aerobic ruckmans in the competition. So I think Melbourne definitely have won out in that trade. Although they might have to still pay at a premium for him. I know the Pies probably will help that a little bit. I think it's still an excellent acquisition.
Yeah, for me, I guess Melbourne's weak point has been their forward line. Obviously, Bailey Fritsch is a good player, a lot of goals, but their midfield and their defence are by far the best parts of the team. You look at obviously Oliver and Petrarca, Langdon, and we know about their defence with all Australians everywhere. But their forward line is kind of an area where they've struggled to find marking targets. Ben Brown's been in and out a fair bit. Tom McDonald's been in and out a fair bit. Cosy Big has been a decent score for, but I'm not sure this improves their forward line at all because I don't think Max Gawn is a good forward. I think he obviously had a decent prelim final last year where he had a purple patch and everything, but he seems to really struggle with his set shots. He contests well, brings the ball down, but I don't know. I just don't know how it works because we know Grundy hasn't really had much opportunity to play forward. He's always been the number 1 ruck, and a lot of his career he's rucked by himself. So he hasn't really had any backups. We haven't really seen him play forward a huge amount. But I can't recall him, kicking bags of 3 and 4 and taking a lot of marks up forward too often. And you look at what also Melbourne's lost. They've obviously Sam Wiedemann's gone. Luke Jackson's gone out of the forward line, 2 out of options. So, it is interesting. It'll be interesting to see how that kind of develops at Melbourne. We'll move on to Jack Bowes, and it's a crazy trade. So Jack Bowes and pick 7 have gone to Geelong for a future 3rd. Now, obviously, the Cats are taking on I think it's 1.6 million over 2 years, so about 800,000 a season. They're taking on Bo's salary, but and the AFL actually had to approve this deal. This is the first time that a deal like this has pretty much happened to this extent with like the most lopsided trade. Do you think it's going to maybe open the floodgates for this to happen more? We've sort of seen it with Grundy and I guess with O'Meara too, and probably Mitchell. Do you think this we'll see this happen more often now?
Yeah, I mean it's almost another avenue for players to exit their existing clubs and move to a new one. I'm reminded of Will Brodie's trade from Gold Coast to Fremantle. I believe Gold Coast kind of wanted him off his books, or he wanted the trade. And I think his contract was around about 350 for that 1 year. The year after, the year that ended up being traded to Fremantle, which was this year, and Fremantle actually split that contract to spread it over 2 seasons. So maybe a bit of a spruce up in the financial department. So I think, this type of trade, although the Bows is very unique, obviously the package of pick 7 was very enticing for clubs. And we saw, I think, half a dozen clubs put their hand up to take Bows, when really they probably wanted pick 7, which is quite a low draft pick, so to speak, in the up-and-coming draft in about 3 weeks or 4 weeks' time. So it's definitely a unique way to look at it. I mean, now that 1 or 2 has been approved, and there's a lot of salary dumping and rival clubs offering to pay each a player's salary, like a Grundy and I think a Tom Mitchell as well, and even Adam Treloar after he left Collingwood at the end of 2020. Now at the Bulldogs, I think it's now a new way to kind of reshuffle and revamp your playing list. Obviously, it's probably not ideal when you see a Brodie Grundy sign on for 7 years and only able to actually live that out 2 years, 2 years of that deal, with 5 more to go, which he'll now be at a rival club, which is strange probably for Collingwood fans and AFL fans alike. So it's definitely changed the landscape of how deals can get done and how deals can get brokered between clubs and players and the like. But yeah, obviously this looks like it could be intercepting the way trades can be done and executed going forward. And I wouldn't be surprised if we see a few more in the future.
Yeah, I mean, it almost allows clubs that's mismanaged their list to a sort of way out in a way, and I guess it rewards clubs that are, have salary cap space that have managed their list well, that they can obviously take these opportunities on. And we look at Geelong now. So Geelong have picked up Jack Bowes, Tanner Bruin, Ollie Henry, and they've also got pick 7, and they're the premiers. Like, I mean, is that even fair?
No, you wouldn't have thought so. I mean, sorry?
I said, how well have they done? It's amazing, hey?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost like the old saying, the rich get richer and the poor get poorer. I mean, they've somehow pulled it off, but I mean, you can't really fault the Cats, although all 17 other clubs would be utterly disappointed and thinking it's not fair. They must be doing shifty deals with the AFL. No, that's not the case. They've just managed their list, to perfection, to obviously bring in this young talent. We've obviously heard Tom Hawkins taking massive pay cuts, Joel Selwood taking massive pay cuts, Patrick Dangerfield willing to take massive pay cuts as well, to bring in more youth to keep Geelong relevant. As we've mentioned in the past, I think they missed one final series since 2007, which was that 2015 year. So the ability they have to kind of all buy into the club and and the organisation to allow themselves every possible chance to win a premiership each season is the reason they're doing it. And maybe rival clubs should probably take a leaf out of their book.
They're certainly lucky in my eyes. They've got a nice part of the world to sell. Great Ocean Road. You can live in a nice house on the beach and everything, and it's a nice part of the world down there. I think it definitely helps them as a selling point. We'll move on to Luke Jackson. He finally got to Fremantle. It was for pick. So Fremantle gave up pick 13, a future first round, and a future second round. So, I mean, considering that, Fremantle are probably going to be up the ladder next year, they've given up 2 first-round picks, but they're obviously at the back end of the first round. Did you think that Melbourne might hold out for more? Did you think that was fair? And how do you think Jackson will fit in at Freo?
I think it was fair. Jackson, although he's proven his worth, he's probably going to be the next best ruckman. Once probably gone, and Grundy and Nick Naitanui retire, he's probably going to take the mantle within the next 3 or so years. Obviously, at 2021, rising star that has a ridiculous amount of potential. And I think, for Melbourne to snare, I think it was, a 2 first rounds and a future second as well. Well, a future first and a future second, that was. along with pick 13 for this upcoming draft. I think that was a fair trade. I think Melbourne probably, I think for me, 2 first-round picks for Luke Jackson. I think he's fair. He's still quite young, although he is promising the world. Obviously, we never know what actually might eventuate in the years to come. Hopefully, for his sake and for Fremantle's sake, he does turn out to be an out-and-out star. I think he's obviously got the assets to do so, but obviously we'll have to wait and see for the years to come by. But I think, yeah, obviously he'll slot into Fremantle, I think, pretty effortlessly. I think the combination between him and Sean Darcy could be very damaging. It kind of a little bit like Sean Darcy's a little bit like, I guess, a Brody Grundy or Max Gawn. We haven't seen a lot of him up forward. He's not necessarily the most mobile ruckman going around, but his ability to compete and actually turn himself into one of the best ruckmans in the competition, it has so much upside for Fremantle. Obviously, they made a semi-final this year. They came 6th, and they've got such elite young talent to still improve and progress in the coming years. To think that they'll be around the mark for many years to come. But I mean, if you look at their starting midfield, just to say Jackson, O'Meara obviously recently just traded, Andrew Brayshaw and Caleb Strong. That's a scary starting four. Not to mention Will Brodie, who played all 24 games for Fremantle this year, and was one of their best, doing the hard stuff, the contested possession as well, and all that stuff. So I think Fremantle will be very happy. The fact that obviously O'Meara as well, and Jackson, and obviously that big deal, and probably one of the biggest deals of this trade, has gone through. And yeah, I see him kind of slotting in there quite nicely.
And one final question, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Out of all the clubs, AFL trade period, who do you think has had the worst trade period of any AFL club? There's been a lot of clubs that have had amazing periods, but who do you think's had the worst?
Well, I mean, there was a few quiet clubs throughout the period. I think St Kilda might have only acquired Zane Cordy from the Western Bulldogs, but also lost Ben Long. So it's not necessarily a bad trade period for them, but obviously they've recognised they've got the talent within the club that they don't necessarily need to bring in from rival clubs to I guess, pump up their list. They're kind of just hoping and not praying, but kind of expecting that their talent will develop. Obviously, Jade Gresham and stuff like that. West Coast, kind of only Junior Rioli was one of the players that obviously went to Port Adelaide, but they brought in a smattering of picks, but they were relatively quiet. It's hard to kind of differentiate between which clubs won and which clubs haven't in the trade period. Obviously, we don't know until next year or the years after. Once these draft picks and players who have cost clubs, how they've performed in the following years, we don't necessarily know. But to be honest, yeah, I'm kind of at a stump right now.
Yeah, for me, it has to be St Kilda. If you look for all the AFL clubs, there's at least some kind of move that's been made by every club. And St Kilda was talked about, I guess, possibly Brad Hill going to North Melbourne in a salary dump. That did end up happening, and possibly the same thing with Hunter Clark. And just a bit of a nothing so-so list. And just haven't really added anything to the list, haven't really added any draft picks. And it's interesting because most AFL clubs kind of had a bit of made some moves and stuff, and they didn't. So interesting times down at St Kilda. It's a big year for that club, and if they sort of struggle with mediocrity again, it's not going to be good for them at all. So anyway, thank you very much for joining us. It's been a crazy AFL trade period. We literally, as we started, everything was happening. There was trades coming through left, right, and centre. The busiest we reckon we've ever had in terms of trade periods at the last second. I think it might be.
Well, it definitely felt like that. There was a piece on Sporting News that, looked at potentially 60, 62, 63 players to move to rival clubs. I think we kind of totaled out at 33, 34 in the end. I might have to double check that. But yeah, it was definitely one of the busier trade periods. A lot of big names, I think, in this trade period. I mean, obviously mentioned Brody Grundy, Luke Jackson, Jaeger O'Meara, Rory Lobb, players with kind of a lot of weight behind them and their ability to obviously perform on the football field have made moves to new clubs and new homes now. So it's it definitely felt busy. I mean, obviously the last 10, 11 days have been chock-a-block, with trades and rumours, kind of circling non-stop. But yeah, it's definitely been an interesting trade period. I'm kind of excited to see how these players will fit in their new homes.
Well, I bet you're glad it's over because you've been working pretty hard on all the trade stuff. So I'm Kieran Francis. Thank you very much for joining us, and Aidan Cellini as well. And we'll be back with some more videos, possibly around the draft and going through next season. Cheers.